It's our last lesson we're going to do here for Unit 8 about circles. Now this is one more formula, but it's a little bit different. We're talking about the equation of a circle. So this is actually an equation we can use to plot a circle on a graph, just like we plot like a line with y equals mx plus b. We have this formula here to plot a circle. So make sure you have this copied down very carefully. In the parentheses, we have the minus. In between, you have a plus, and this is r squared. You definitely want to write down as well what they represent. The equation does you no good if you don't know what these things represent. Now, in the same way that, if you recall, with y equals mx plus b back from algebra, you'd have an equation look something like y equals 2x plus 5 or something like that. In the same way here, the y and the x are going to stay put when we write our equation. But we'll see that when we see some equations. The h and the k get plugged in, as well as the r. Some really important things to notice about this equation, and we're going to practice them though, is the center of the circle. What's going to end up happening, because h and k represents the coordinates for the center of the circle. So where the point would be on the graph for the center, r is the radius of the circle. So remember, radius is the distance from the center to the outside of the circle. So we have those two pieces in this equation. Because in the parentheses here, it goes x minus h, but just h is the center of the circle, or at least the x coordinate for the center of the circle. What ends up happening is the center point is going to have opposite signs of what we see in the equation. This minus here is going to flip the sign, so that our center is actually the opposite of what we see, but we'll practice that in a bit. As well as that in the equation, we have r squared, but just r by itself is the radius of the circle. So we have to be careful when we're trying to figure out what the radius is. We have the radius squared in the equation, just r is just the radius. But again, like I said, we're going to practice this a bit here. So here's an example of an equation of a circle. What we're going to do is we're going to say what the center is. Again, that's the h and the k. And we're going to say what the r is. That's the radius, right? So what I'm going to do here, and what I say you should do for all these questions, is copy down the formula underneath what we see here. So I have x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So what I can do is see very clearly how these things line up. I need to know the center, which again is going to be the hk, and I need to know the radius, which is going to be just r. So let's look at this. So again, I need my h and my k for the center. Here's the thing though. Notice this goes x minus 1 and x minus h. If we want just h, well, the minus is already there, a part of the equation, right? Notice this is minus, this is minus. So just h by itself is just 1. Again, our center goes h, then k. So there's our first point when we need to plot the equation of a circle on a graph. So again, what we can see is here I saw it as -1, but I pull it out as the opposite. Again, that's because the equation already has a negative. So if I see a negative, that's not part of the h, right? H is just the number next to the negative. So once again, in this case, I see x minus 1, x minus h. That means h is just 1. Now we can see right here though that the formula normally is y minus k, but I see y plus. What this means is k is actually going to be a -7. That's because if I have, again, y minus is what I normally want to see, and I see a plus, that means I am adding a negative, right? Y plus a -7 is the same thing as saying y minus 7. So we're going to pull out k as being a -7, not a positive. So that seems a little bit confusing. The important thing to remember is that whatever you see here, it's going to be the opposite when we pull it out and say, this is our center. So I saw -1 and +7. Our center is actually +1 and -7. And once again, that's because the set equation has these minuses here. They make them the opposite. So there is our center. If I wanted to go plot this on a graph, which we're going to do later, or at least we're going to see an example later, I would go over 1, down 7. There's the center of my circle. So the radius now, notice that again, the radius is just r, but the equation is r squared. So this equals r squared, not just r. We want just r. So if this is r squared, how do I get rid of that square so I just have r? We take the square root. If I take the square root of a squared number, I'm going to get my answer, right? So what's the square root of 36? 6. And again, that's because if I take the square root of r squared, that square is gone, right? The opposite of a square is a square root. And there we are, we're done with the question. Looking at that equation, we've pulled out the center, we've pulled out the radius. We would then be able to go to a graph and do this, which again, we'll see at the end of the lesson. Let's try it again. Okay, so once more, let's go ahead and copy this down and copy the equation right below, being very careful to copy it exactly. And then we're going to pull out the center and the radius. So center is once again going to be HK. And the radius is going to be just r, even though we have r squared in the equation. So be careful here. So again, h and k line up right here, but we need to pull them out as the opposite of what we see. So what should be our center here? If I see +4 and -2, what's my center? -4 and +2. Again, the set equation goes x minus, whereas this goes x plus. We need to do the opposite, yeah? So -4, +2. And for the radius, once again, this is r squared. How am I going to get just the r? Go ahead and try it. Again, we're going to take the square root. If this is r squared, to get just r, I should take the square root. So the square root of 81 is actually a set number that is 9. Okay, there's our answers. These questions go pretty quick. We're just mostly identifying, pulling out. We're going to do one more example given an equation, and then we're going to go in reverse. So let's try one more because there's one more thing we need to see here. Guys, excuse me, a little bit different. Probably notice something here, it's a little bit different, but we are still going to copy the equation underneath. We are trying to find the center, which is HK. And we are trying to find the radius, which is R. So this one's a little bit weird. When I go to try and pull my HK out, well, nothing is being subtracted from the x. It's not even in parentheses, right? It's just x squared. But that does actually tell us our h. If nothing is being subtracted from x, what's nothing as a number? 0. So if you don't see anything being subtracted from, or anything in parentheses, I should say, if you don't see anything in parentheses with the x or the y, that means that letter is going to be 0. So since the x is by itself, our h is 0. And then what is going to be our k? Here we see it as a +8. What am I going to write here? -8. It needs to be the opposite. Oh, oops, that's our answer. So there's our center. Now our radius here, we are going to do the same thing we've done the past 2 questions. This is r squared, and I want r. But here's the thing. When I go to take the square root of this, if you try plugging in the square root of 41 into your calculator, it's not an even number. It comes out to be a really long decimal. So if when you guys are doing these questions, you try to take the square root to get r, and you see that it comes out to be a huge, long, ugly number, just leave it as the square root number, and that's it. You don't need to write it as a decimal, just leave it as a square root if it doesn't come out evenly. If it does come out evenly, then that's your answer, like we did in the last two questions. But if it doesn't come out evenly, just leave it square root 41, boom, there's our r. Okay, so now we're gonna go in reverse. We got a couple more question types here. We're going in reverse. So we want to now write the equation of the circle. So our end goal is now to end up at our equation rather than starting with an equation. So again, we're just going to go into reverse. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and pull this down here so I have it. Oops. Oh, can I do it? I'm going to get this out of the way. I'm going to do this and pull this down. There we go. Okay, so here's our equation for our circle. We need to take this center and this radius and pop them into their spots. So remember that this is the h, this is the k, this is just r. So let's try this. I'm going to copy piece by piece what I have here. So in the normal equation, I have x minus, right? That's the normal equation. And now I need to pop in my h, but my h is -3. So I have x minus a -3. There's my h plugged in. I have y minus in the normal equation, and now I need to plug in k. But for k, I have, once again, a -5. So I have y minus a -5 squared equals, once again, radius 2, this is just r, and I need r squared. So what we have is 2 squared. So I'm going to simplify this a little bit because minus a minus, we know what that becomes, right? That becomes a positive. So I'm going to rewrite this as x plus 3, that's minus a minus, and y plus 5, because that's also minus a minus. If it were not minus a minus, it would just be a minus, right? And then 2 squared, that's 2 times 2, that's 4. So here is my final answer. So again, things to notice. You can do it this way, where I rewrote the equation exactly and went x minus -3, y minus -5, or what you can realize is what we just talked about. Whatever I see here, the opposite is going to go into the equation. So I saw a -3, it ended up as a +3. I saw a -5, it ended up as a +5. And then again, the r gets squared. Let's try this again, keeping in mind that, again, what we see for the center, the opposite is going to get popped into our equation. So I want you to try this one. Again, we are going to have x minus h squared plus y minus k squared. You want to write this every time. Here's my h, here's my k, it's 0. Try and think back to that question we had earlier. What does that look like? And then this is r. Go ahead and give it a shot. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and skip to the fact that I see a +4 here. In my equation, it's like these parentheses are opposite land. I'm going to see it as the opposite. So I'm going to see it as a -4. Now, I could put parentheses here and go y minus 0, but y minus 0 is just y. So I have just y by itself. Again, parentheses y minus 0, you're technically not wrong, but it's unnecessary, right? So just y by itself here. And then my r is 5, but it needs to be squared. That's a very common mistake to forget that. So I'm going to rewrite this one more time with squaring that 5, which is going to be 25. And there's my final answer. So not terribly difficult. You just want to go very carefully, guys. A lot of this stuff is going to be multiple choice on the test. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to get it wrong with something as simple as having the wrong sign. If you go too fast and go, oh, x plus 4, you got the wrong answer. So just go very slow, talk to yourself in your head. Okay, I have 4 and 0. I need to do the opposite. So I need -4 and then 0. There's no opposites for 0. I have r here, but I need r squared. That should be 25. Talk to yourself through these questions. Now, there's one more type we're going to do here. I kind of skipped around a little bit. If you can see, the numbers kind of skip around for the examples. But really, it's the same as this. It's just that we have to get this stuff ourselves. We still want to write the equation. So from the graph, we are going to pull out the center and the radius. And then we're going to write the equation just like we did in the last two questions. So our center, they give it to us as that dot right here, yeah? What is this center? Go ahead and count it. Take a moment. That should be 1, 2, 3, 4, up 2. There is our center, 4, 2. And the radius, now you can count the radius 4 different directions because the radius is always the center to the outside, center to the outside, center to the outside. I can count the radius as long as it's straight up and down or side to side. We can count it any direction. It's going to be the same. That's the point of a circle. So I'm going to go ahead and count it here. The radius is from the center to the outside. So 1, 2, 3. Boom, there's my radius. Pretty simple, yeah? And again, if I counted it here, 1, 2, 3, I'm going to get the same thing. So take a moment now and take the center and radius like we just did and write the equation. Being careful that what we see here gets turned into opposite and the parentheses opposite land, and that this is just r. We need to square it in the equation. Go ahead and try it. Okay, so I see a +4 and a +2. These are going to be opposites. -4 and -2. This is just r by itself, and I need r squared. So I'm going to just do this in one step. That's going to be 3 squared is what's going to go right here. 3 squared, that's 3 times 3, that's 9. And there's my answer. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try these questions. It doesn't get more difficult than this. It just takes some practice and takes some being very careful. Again, you will get these questions wrong with as simple a mistake as accidentally looking at the wrong sign, getting the wrong sign. You don't want to do that. Go slow. Be careful. Let's practice this a bit more.